Yeah, I have a fresh AdonisJS application scaffolded with Flare, and I have gone ahead to create an account. I have also created a settings page, which is where all the two-factor authentication stuff will happen. Of course, for now it is empty, so this is what we are going to build on. In this lesson, we are going to start by creating the migration to add the necessary columns to the user's table. And along the line, I will explain what each column does. Node is make migration, add two-factor columns to users table. Then we specify the table the migration is for, which is the users table. We'll be adding 3 columns to the users table. The first one will be a text field, which we are going to call two-factor secrets, which will store users' two-factor authentication secret. And the secret is going to be encrypted for additional security. So this field is going to be nullable, because we want users to be able to enable or disable two-factor authentication. So by default, two-factor authentication won't be enabled for users. And at that point, this column will be null. So it is when users enable two-factor authentication that we then fill this column. The next column will be similar to this. So I'm going to duplicate this. And the column is going to be two-factor recovery codes. Just as I explained in the last lesson, users will be able to log in using the code or token generated from their authenticator app, and they'll also be able to log in with a recovery code in cases where they lost their authenticator app. So this column is where we will store a list of recovery codes that the user can use to log in place of the token generated from their authenticator app. Also, this column will be encrypted. Then lastly, we are going to have a timestamp field, which we call two-factor confirmed at, and it will also be nullable. This column will simply store a timestamp of when the user confirmed enabling two-factor authentication. Remember, like I said, at the point of user enabling two-factor authentication, they will be presented to scan a QR code or enter a secret key on their authenticator app. And to complete that process, they will need to enter the token that their authenticator app generated. So at the point of entering that token and verifying that that token is indeed correct, so that is when we will fill this field. Next, let's update the down method to drop the columns. So table drop columns. Before we run the migration, let's update the user model as well. Public two-factor secret, which should be a string or null. Next, let's update the decorator. First, we're going to set serialize as to null, which will remove the field when the object is serialized. Then also, we're going to do the encryption I mentioned earlier. At the point of saving the secret to the database, we want to encrypt it. Then at the point of fetching it from the database, we want to decrypt it. And instead of doing this manually, we are going to make use of the prepare and consume properties of the column decorator, which does that for us automatically. So prepare. So this will be the function that will be called before persisting the field to the database. This will take the value, which will be a string or null. Value here is the value we want to insert into the database. I'm going to check if the value is not null. And if the value is not null, we are going to encrypt the value and persist it in the database. Otherwise, we are going to store the null value as it is, which is basically doing nothing. Because remember, we set the column to be nullable. I'll be making use of a ternary operator, value. So if the value is not null, we are going to encrypt the value. Let me pull in the encryption module. Then we can make use of the module to encrypt the value. Then else, we just make use of the null value. Next, I'm going to do the inverse of this, which will be using the consume property. Again, this will accept a value, and value here is the value coming from the database. Again, it can be a string or null. If the value is not null, we are going to decrypt it. Otherwise, we'll return the null value as it is. Next, let's do the same thing for the recovery codes. This is going to be an array of strings or null. If value is not null, it's going to be an array of strings. So we need to first JSON stringify the array. So JSON stringify the array before encrypting it. Then we are going to do the inverse here. First, we need to pass the JSON string. we're going to pass the encrypted JSON string. The pass method expects the first argument to be a string, but here we are passing a type of string or null. But since we know that this will only run if the value is not null, so we are safe to tell TypeScript that, yeah, this is going to always be a string by making use of the bang sign. Lastly, let's add the two-factor confirmed at field, column.datetime, then public two-factor confirmed at, which will be a type of datetime or null. To wrap up this lesson, let's run the migration.